So I'm here today with ex-Premier League footballer Dave Kitson. Dave, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
I said to you just off camera before we started, do you know how many games you played? You actually played 422 professional games. Does it feel like that?
It's not something that I've ever kept track of. I don't know. I couldn't tell you how many games I've played for clubs or how many goals or games, and it doesn't have any relevance to me. I just have no interest in it whatsoever.
And that's really interesting you say that, because we were talking before and football wasn't going to be your first calling, was it? Take me back to your early 20s. Am I right in saying you wanted to be a travel writer and travel around the world? Is that right?
Yeah. So writing was my big passion, reading, and it's the escapism of it, and it can just be taken anywhere, but just picking up a book and just be taken anywhere and not knowing exactly where you're going to be taken. Then you can, I guess I have a competitive angle, which is, I wonder if I can write something, and actually I wonder if I can write something better. And but travel writing, the problem I was trying to solve really was, how do you get around the world on somebody else's ticket? That's really what I'm trying to achieve. And but circumstances dictated that I ended up going down the football. I loved football, don't get me wrong. I'm really, really passionate about the game. But there was something that I was just drawn to the global village. That it's just a big world, and you starting from the place where you're never going to be able to see all of it, but how can I see as much of it as possible? And that was so interesting to me.
So you were looking at that as a career. I know you did some work experience at the local paper, and then you're playing non-league football, and Cambridge come knocking. Tell us how that came about.
Yeah, well, I was playing pub football for a pub called the Arena Tavern in Letchworth, which is where I grew up, and there were two brothers there who I also worked with at Sainsbury, so we all had full-time jobs at the local Sainsbury's. Yeah. And this is the kind of town that it was. You married a local girl, you worked locally, you were buried there eventually. And that was, I was really keen to break away from that. So local pub football, and then these brothers says, we're actually season ticket holders of this local non-league team.
Okay.
Come down, because you look like you can play a little bit. Why don't you come down? And because I'm a lefty, which is, I'm not. I was born right-footed, but I just did it to be difficult. And so I played my career left-footed, and went down there. We had a really good non-league team, one of the best in the country, really, really good non-league team. So I was very, very lucky, and it was a real sharp learning curve.
Yeah.
And I just began scoring goals. I never played as a striker. I just ended up there somehow, and then Cambridge signed me, and I was, hang on a minute, I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm not supposed to be here. Yeah. So the next minute, I'm at Cambridge United.
Yeah.
And for me, it was just competition. It was, I wonder if I can be the best player here. I wonder if I can show them that actually coming out of non-league, you can be somebody worth following. And that was my mindset at the time. I wasn't easy company back then, I have to say. I was, right. But that was my mentality. Like, how can I be better? Can I get further? Can I show them that actually and I think there was probably a little bit about me which was a bit aggrieved that perhaps I'd slipped through the net and been missed, and that spurred me on as well to try and do better.
And tell me, do you get a lot of support when you go into that? Because you're kind of thrust into the limelight. Was there a lot of mental support? Was there a lot of people kind of telling you what to do? Did you find it easy to make that transition to becoming a future Premier League footballer?
Where I knew that things were going to be different, and this is a bit of a tough story. But if I wanted a day off from Sainsbury's, you rang in sick.
Right.
And no one cared.
Mm-hmm.
The football world is totally, totally different. I used to get the train from Letchworth to Cambridge. And the first training session, I was on the train and somebody threw themselves in front of the train.
Oh my goodness.
And I called to say, listen, this has happened. I don't know how I'm going to get back. I'll see you tomorrow. And the message that came back was, we'll see you when you get here. And that was a real eye opener. That was oh, okay, this is different. It doesn't matter what happens. You need to be there and 100% invested. And so once that message was made clear to me, that's how I live my life.
How easy is it to switch on and focus and know that you have to not call in sick, or you have to really, really put 110% into that career?
I mean, I never came through an academy. And I always used to wear that as a badge of honour. Later, it would become an issue. So in terms of how footballers were, how the football world worked, it was totally alien to me, and it ended up affecting me. There was parts of it that I couldn't deal with, used to rail against, that didn't make any sense to me. Later, I would use that and talk about it because what you used to get was, well, this is the way it's always been done. And I would always be, yeah, but that doesn't make it right. You know, this doesn't help. But it's too easy to fall into the way of doing things. And I think that's why I ended up getting a bit of a reputation of a bit difficult. I was a bit difficult. And it wasn't. It was just, it's not right. Why don't we do it like this?
If I bring you fast forwarding on now, and you signed for Reading, championship at the time, won the championship with a record 106 points at the time. We talked about change of mindsets. When you win the championship and you go into the Premier League, is there a massive change like people would expect?
Yeah, there is. There is. The Premier League, the most obvious way of identifying that you're in a different environment is the players they're bigger and they're stronger. I know that sounds really obvious, but you can actually, when you're lining up, it's. I always used to think playing in the Championship, it was like playing against older boys, and the Premier League was men.
Yeah.
In every sense, fully focused, unbelievably determined, and just really fit and really strong and really aggressive, and hard. You know, hard in terms of if you would play against one of the top teams and get a result, they never shook your hand. Ever.
Really?
Never. They would never, ever shake your hand. They would always just walk off the pitch. And I later learned that was because the analysis started straight away in the changing room. That's where they were going. They wanted to know why that hadn't worked out the way it was supposed to. That was really interesting to me. The crowds never bothered me. The stadiums never bothered me. I was never overly impressed by playing somewhere. The only one where I ever felt genuine sort of emotion was Anfield. When I came out of the tunnel at Anfield, and you had those Fagan and Paisley and Shankly and all these flat, and you think, oh my, this is as good as it gets.
Does it? And they obviously start playing You'll Never Walk Alone.
Yeah.
Does that send, for me, obviously, who's never played professional football, and if I was out there, I think that would make the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. Are you at that point thinking, wow, and then you have to switch on and go, I've got to play 90 minutes of football here? How difficult is that?
That sign, interestingly, when I began to study psychology, and I thought about that sign, and that sign obviously didn't start out to be what it is now, but it is, this is Anfield, is like a bullet in the head if you're an opposition player. And I do remember one of our players behind me saying, oh good, we made it to the right place. Just kind of relaxed everybody.
Yeah.
But it is, because it's all sequenced. There's the sign, there's the first tones of You'll Never Walk On, there's the flags, and it's not necessarily showmanship, it's a celebration of this is who we are. We are the biggest club. That's how they carry themselves, whether you agree with it or not. We are the biggest club in this country, one of the biggest clubs in the world, and this is what we've won, and we are going to shove it in your face, but they're proud of it as well. It's it's an interesting dynamic. And if you're not careful, you can find yourself sort of getting a little bit unfocused. Yeah.
And in those 2 years that Reading were in the Premier League, was there any moment where you stood on the pitch and you thought to yourself, wow, this is a certain person, or wow, I'm in this stadium, a bit like you just said for Anfield there? Were there any moments where you kind of almost tuned out because of, like any normal human being, you're enjoying what's around you?
Yeah, there was actually. There was one. It never bothered me about who we were playing, when we were playing them, what run of form they were on, what run of form we were, none of that bothered me. I was much more interested in how the individuals come together to create a team. And when you then start watching the individuals, so before a game at Old Trafford, I was just stretching off to the side, and I happened to look over, and Paul Scholes was there, just practicing, just clipping the ball to a coach, and it was honestly one of the most impressive things I've ever seen, because it was just so it was robotic, but at the same time it was just like watching poetry. It was so effortless for him, and that's the first time I ever stood on a pitch and thought, I shouldn't be here. These guys are way above where I should be. Where I am. Paul Scholes is, when you talk about the greatest players, Paul Scholes, I mean, the famous Zidane quote when he won the midfielder of the year or whatever it was, and they asked him how that felt, and he said, I don't know, ask Paul Scholes. And he was at that level. But him and Luka Modric are the two where I've gone, I don't know what I'm doing here. How have I gone from pub football to here?
Yeah.
And I've clearly plateaued and shouldn't be here.
Okay, so I have to talk about this. Obviously, Reading spent 2 great seasons in the Premier League, unfortunately got relegated. Take us inside. You talked about the dressing room and the mentality in there. Take us inside the dressing room that season when you probably know you're kind of slipping and the door's open. How do you manage to pick yourself up and go out and, another loss, or, we're going to get relegated? Is that playing on your mind when you're in that dressing room?
I think as the pressure gets bigger, it does start to affect you. I think pressure's an interesting thing because you can actually turn it into something you can use if you know how to, which we didn't know that at the time. I came to learn this later just by studying it. But the interesting thing with Reading is that Reading's most successful period is when it truly embraced what it was, when it created a culture of a moneyball type culture. It signed young, hungry players. None of them had families at that point, or very few had families at that point. They all wanted to get to the Premier League. There was a complete understanding that if you do well for us, we'll sell you. And everyone was on board with that, and everything was tuned to that. So we got promoted in 2006, 2007, and my generation left, and they did it again with the next one. That generation left, and then the owners started to come in, throw money around.
Yeah.
And that's where you lose the culture, because it's not that kind of club. It isn't a club that demands millions and hundreds of millions of pounds spent on it. It's not that club. And that's when I started to get most interested in the culture and the way of doing things. But in terms of the pressure, it's a massive regret. People say, "Oh, I have no." Everyone does. I'd rather we hadn't been relegated. Of course, yeah. It's as simple as that. So,
I wonder why that is.
So it's a regret.
Yeah.
But you then have to change your mind to. There's nothing I can do about it now. So I have to be grateful for what we did. What we did in that little pocket of the country was extraordinary. We built a team that we built a squad that cost about £3 million at a time when there were strikers moving for that on their own in the Championship. The whole squad cost about £3 million, and it broke the points record for the Championship. That record still stands
106
today.
points, yeah.
It's incredible. You can only do that if you create a culture.
So we're talking about cultures, and it's a very interesting one. So Reading went down, Stoke came in for you. Obvious question really, but was there a massive difference in mentality going from Reading in that pocket of the country up to the Potteries? Did you see a change instantly, or was it something that you kind of had to adapt to?
It was so the first thing to say is the style of football was completely different. Yeah. At Reading it was, I can get the ball to my feet, I can get involved in the play. I can dip into midfield if I want to, but primarily I'm a striker. Stoke was a different dynamic. I totally identified with the players in terms of they'd had the same journey. So they'd come up from the Championship and gone into the Premier League, and the buzz was similar. They were really looking forward to it, a little bit nervous about it, understood that some games would be, best forgotten about, but on the whole, ready to embrace and enjoy the experience. I really identified with that. The football, I couldn't get my head around. I just couldn't deal with it. But as I later said, in interviews, that's my fault. Nobody forced me to go and join
Of course.
Stoke. I could have stayed where I was, and we may have come back up. And it was a bit of a culture shock, not in terms of the town. It was the football was a culture shock. It's funny actually because now you think about those Rory Delap throw-ins, and it was really exciting.
They're back in vogue now, though, aren't they?
It's football, fashion in football. Yeah. It always comes round, and it's that stuff will always be there. But I found it quite exciting to play, and the crowd found it really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else hated, Arsene Wenger hated, but there was an interesting thing where Arsenal and Stoke were the total antithesis of one another, and there was a genuine hatred is probably a strong word, but between the managers there was perhaps not the respect that there should have been. Arsene Wenger was extremely critical of Stoke, and Stoke were, well, you have everything you could possibly ever need. And
does that drive you? So when you see that in the media, I mean, we all know what Arsene Wenger thought of Stoke, and obviously there is that phrase of can you do it on a wet Tuesday night in Stoke that goes around football, around the world now in football. Are you as a player, I mean, we talk about when people pin it up in the dressing room, does that happen? Are you aware of that? And Arsenal are coming to town, for example. Does that raise your game as a footballer, or do you treat it as any other game?
I think you have to send it up. I think that's what, when you hear about things, I mean, we had, after the Chelsea incident where Petr Cech fractured his skull, there were countless death threats being sent to the changing room. They were all just pinned on the wall, and we sent them up. It was the only way to deal with it, because if you don't, what is actually contained in those letters is harrowing. If you don't just try and take it as a joke and try and send it up and get it out there. And it was the same with Arsenal, really. We all wanted to play like Arsenal. The reality is we have to accept that we're not good enough to do that, So we had to find a different way. What changed? Because I embraced that. I embraced that. It was very much tailor-made for run faster, kick harder, that kind of stuff. But there was a point where it crossed the line. And where it crossed the line was I was on the bench, and right in front of me, Aaron Ramsey broke his leg. And that was as a direct result of that narrative over the course of the week. And it had built and built and built and built and built until something like that was bound to happen, and it did happen. And I remember Arsene Wenger was here, I was directly behind him, and he probably had no idea who I was, but he turned around. It happened. You heard the crack. He turned around, and he looked straight at me and held his gaze. And I froze, and it was almost as if he was looking at me to say, "I'm surprised you would be a part of this."
Really?
That's how it felt. Probably wasn't thinking that at all.
No,
probably just But that's how it felt, and the next day I decided I was going to leave. I didn't want to be a part of that anymore. That's not why I wanted. That's not why I play football. And it had just gone too far, and it wasn't fun anymore. It just wasn't fun.
There was a defining moment, wasn't there, in your football career where you went on a Christmas trip and you got on the plane and you all went out as a big team, and you spent time speaking to one particular individual, didn't you? That maybe people might find a bit strange, but now when we talk about your future career, you already had an idea, didn't you? Just tell us about that trip you went on.
So it was a Christmas do. We had played Norwich, beaten them, and had a plane ready to fly to Dublin. And I think we were bottom and Norwich were top. So Christmas, everyone's in a good mood. Yeah. So we go on the thing, and in my life, I've always been far more interested in the people behind the scenes. How do things really work? How do they run? Who makes the decisions? And then, so where that leads to is then, okay, that explains why this is like this. But is this the best, or can we do better? Or is there a different way of doing something? That's always been in me. And the Christmas do was, while the players were, chomping at the bit to get to to
I bet they were.
Temple Bar or whatever
Yeah.
it is, and quite literally in some cases throwing the air stewardesses over their shoulders and taking them with them. There was a guy there at the other end who the plane had been chartered from, whoever chartered this plane had been chartered from. And I spent hours talking to him. How does it work? Where do you go? Where's this plane going next? How does that work then? What about 99% of people have no interest in that. They'll look at me and well,
What's Dave up to?
I just spent the whole time with him talking about it. How does this thing? Well, what about this? And and I've always been like that. And I'm just genuinely interested in learning about the things that I don't know about and why they work. Why does that happen? Why does it work? Why do you do it that way? Don't get me wrong. I'm not whiter than white. I still made it to Temple Bar.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, it'd be a crime not to, wouldn't it? But so you then obviously your football career finishes. You go along and you study lots of different things. What was it that attracted you to, and tell our viewers and listeners what you do now, and what was it that attracted you to studying along that line for your future after football?
Well, I think you can't when you're inside football and you're sort of in the belly of the beast, you can't help but be interested. For me, I know some players aren't, but for me, you couldn't help but be interested in why are we doing this? Yeah. Why does it work this way? And then you start to ask questions around psychology. Then you start to ask questions about culture. Now, a long time ago when I played, when the dinosaurs were around, nobody cared. Yeah. Nobody cared. Now, fast forward to podcasts and whatever, that's no one will wrap up about it. That's all they talk about, culture. And you listen to Stephen Bartlett talking to Jurgen Klopp. Culture. How do we do this? Liverpool's a great example for me in terms of culture. Liverpool have not been outside of the top 8 since 1962. It doesn't matter who the owners are, the manager or the chief exec. You swap one out, you swap one in. Yeah. Nothing changes. It's the culture. And that was fascinating to me. And so when I started to study culture and psychology, and that comes from a place of a book that I read from Marshall McLuhan, who was the famous psychologist at the Global Village, which he's looking at it in terms of how do we get everybody, like the whole world, how do we bring everyone in? How does that work? And I'm looking at it, well, how do you get teams of people? Let's start there. Before we solve the world's issues, let's start with teams of people. And that fascinated me. And that is, I thought, this is the next thing that I'm going to do. This is genuinely interesting to me. How do you build teams of people? Mm-hmm.
So doing that now, and obviously having the knowledge you've got from being a professional athlete and a footballer, how do you take that into the corporate world? So if you were to walk into a big company tomorrow, a big named soft drink, for example, or something like that, how would you go in and approach them and say, look, I've got this experience from what I've studied and I've got this experience from being a professional athlete. I really think I can help you here. Yeah,
so the corporate speaking and workshops that I do are centered around a technique that I didn't create it, obviously. It's just one of many variations, but I called it In a Minute. That was the preface behind it. So In a Minute is a technique where you set the parameters with a certain amount of questions for a team of people wherever they're working, and you'll start with describe your job in less than a minute. You should be able to do it in 10 seconds. Mm-hmm. People that go beyond are waffling and unsure of themselves. So it's underpinned by the psychology and the science behind it. And then you move on to, you ask different questions and you move on, and where you're trying to get to is, give me a life story in 1 minute. And that's really difficult to do. And it's really interesting what people leave out and what they put in. And you can tell a lot. And when you do it with a team of people, you will typically have people who don't want to be there. Mm. They're there because the company's paid for it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But the most interesting thing in that is when somebody's speaking and all the heads turn. Mm-hmm. And that's when you know that's it. They're bonded. I didn't know that. Let me know if you need any help with that. I never knew, that kind of stuff. And that technique is unbelievably powerful. Mm. So I partnered when I first started doing it, it was just something that I did with football teams. when I started to take it a bit more seriously, I went to Reading University and said, listen, I would really appreciate your help in terms of putting on some studies. Why is this working? I don't understand let's study it and work it. And so that's where we are at the moment. And I know I'm waffling on, but I'm fascinated by it.
No, not at all. And I think our viewers and listeners will be intrigued to know, because look, professional footballers finish their career. Some we never hear from again. Some obviously are your Roy Keanes and go into punditry and are big names. Others kind of just go back to, we've had taxi drivers, for example, of ex-players. Do you think it's really important now that ex-professionals actually have something they can follow up on, like yourself, where, I mean, look, you're still in your prime. You're not on the scrap heap. You're not not that 85-year-old people are on the scrap heap, but you've still got a long life ahead of you. Is it really important now that we support ex-athletes to go in and do stuff beyond football?
Yeah, I completely agree. Mm-hmm. Where are we now? Coming on for 20 years ago, I'm writing about, here are an elite set of young, healthy people in their mid-30s, most of them, when they finish playing, who are just let go into the ether. What on earth are we doing that for? So we're losing all of this experience, the benefits that we can pass down. And I lobbied for a long time, the PFA, to do exit interviews with a union. How can we help you? What do you want to do now? There's this, and that just made total sense to me. Why there has to be an exit interview for footballers, not just for the ones that have been paid hundreds of thousands of pounds a week. What we'd like you to help them. How can we help you? But for the guys who have been at, pick a club for 15 years. Yeah. Who have been on a wage where it's covering their mortgage every month, and now they're in trouble. It just makes total sense to me. That's really where we should be at, and I still don't understand why we don't do that.
And you sound very much like a book that's been written called The Secret Footballer. I don't know why you sound like that, obviously, but I think there's a lot of rumours going around, and there are a lot of guesses of who that secret footballer is. We obviously now know that it is yourself. What made you just write that as the secret footballer and not as Dave Kitson and kind of your memoir, really? What made you write that and kind of put it out there in the mainstream? Because it did ruffle some feathers, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It did. There were some people caught in the crossfire. Mm.
These things happen. Yeah.
These things happen. All right. But football to me was in such a bad place. When you come through this way into the Premier League, it's you see the whole spectrum, and you see all of the problems, and you realise that actually the Premier League is, yes, it's the elite level, but it doesn't define football, and actually real football, if you like, doesn't happen there. Mm-hmm. It's happening at these other clubs, where it's a lot more immediate and hand to mouth, and that was a sort of an injustice that I felt throughout my career, that these clubs were being not looked after as well as they should be, and the players within them and the people within them, of course. The secret footballer was, I suppose, it was a way of dealing with it for me. Mm-hmm. Football, nothing made sense to me. Why not write about it and try and figure it out myself? Yeah. Why does this? And very often you'd write something and say, "Oh, okay, I get it now," because I've followed that thought through. Very often, none of it made sense. None of it made sense, to the point where it was what we were doing was unsafe. It was dangerous. It wasn't looking after players mentally. Our union wasn't fit for purpose, clearly. And I began to feel aggrieved at that. The issue that I had was, no one cares who I am. But, I can rattle the cage as Dave Kitson, but who cares? Mm-hmm. It's so easy to ignore. Yeah. An anonymous player talking from inside the game in the Premier League was going to get everybody's attention, mm-hmm. Whether they liked it or not. And it was I guess it's a bit of a cop-out for me. But you have to understand that at the time, there was this ridiculous notion that there was an inner sanctum that you didn't talk about. And the problem is, once you have inner sanctums that you don't talk about, people get taken advantage of. So somebody will come in and relieve hundreds of thousands of pounds because they've sold a bad product. And why do we want to keep that in here?
Yeah,
that's an issue. Mental health suffers. I think 1 in 2 players within 2 years of playing football, finishing their career, would suffer with depression or worse. 1 in 3 would go bankrupt. 1 in 3 would get divorced. That's what happens when you create an inner sanctum. That's a problem. That's an issue. So I railed against that. There were a lot of people that came out and said, "Oh, you've gone against the inner sanctum." The inner sanctum for me is bullshit.
Yeah,
it's bullshit. It's just a word that you're using, and it depends on what it is that you're saying. I have no interest in if you're married to her but you're seeing her. I couldn't care less. I'm interested in how we change football. So the Secret Footballer was a way of me dealing with it, certainly. But it was I want to alert people to what's going on in this game because it's not right. And it was really important to leave I'm an opinionated person. How can you not be in football? But you had to write it as, this is what's happening. You make your own mind up.
Yeah.
I've got a view, but it's not about that. This is what's happening in football. These are the things that are going on. And it had to be done anonymously. You have to understand that we didn't have podcasts. We didn't have podcasts back then.
Yeah.
Now
we've got millions of them.
the critique of the Secret Footballer was always, you're talking about things that are nobody else's business. Now, everyone's got a pod. People won't shut up about it. They won't stop talking about what's happening in changing rooms. But at the time, that didn't happen. No one spoke about football, and the floodgates just after that, because I think footballers read it. I know there was a selection of books that went to the World Cup with the England squad, and it was one of the books that went. And I never found out what anybody thought of it or if they read it. But clearly, people were thinking about it and talking about it, and they identified with it. Whatever else it was, anyone who read it would go, it can only be a footballer. You would only know that if you were a footballer. And there were all these conspiracy theories about a whole bunch of journalists have written it or whatever. It was one player, believe me. And it sort of served a purpose. It got conversations started. It helped to highlight how ineffectual the PFA were. One of the things that I'm most pleased with is when the PFA changed. Maheta came in as chief executive and totally transformed the PFA, and now it does what it's supposed to do. And so it's had an impact. Was it worth it for football? Maybe. Probably not for me to decide. Was it worth it emotionally for me and my family? No. 100% no.
Mm-hmm. And I think I know the answer to this anyway, but looking at those conspiracy theories, and you've written it, and probably a handful of people knew with you, did you enjoy looking at people trying to work that out, or did that become a bit of a burden?
What I didn't like was the social media aspect. The Guardian were so keen. So the Guardian, when I came up with the idea, that was a time when Banksy was just exploding.
Okay.
Who essentially is a secret artist, right?
Yeah.
There was an article that was being written in the FT at the weekend called The Secret Agent, who was an estate agent to the rich and famous, and he was writing an article about how things work and that sort of stuff. And I used to love that article. And I just used to think, God, if this was a footballer, this would be great.
Yeah.
And sat on the idea for a little while, and then I called a journalist called Stuart James at The Guardian and said, listen, I don't know what this is, but I can't get out, I can't leave it alone. And we had a little chat, and then we went in to meet Paul Johnson, who was the deputy editor of The Guardian, and I could tell that they were super keen to do something, which concerned me. because that doesn't necessarily make it
No,
the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So I wrote a few columns, showed them what it is. It's not kiss and tell stuff or anything like that. It's which I'm trying to explain what's happening. And they were brilliant with it. And they gave me one rule that I wasn't allowed to break. And that was don't upset the Liverpool fans. That was the one rule they gave me.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Which had something to do, had its roots in Hillsborough, and apparently the Sun traffic had all migrated to the Guardian. And they were very keen not to rock that boat. And that was it. Other than that, they just let me get on with it. And it was, I enjoyed writing about it, but the pressure of carrying that around was horrible. It was really, really hard. Especially the worst time by a mile was I wrote an article. No one talked about mental health back then. Nobody, secret footballers or otherwise. And I'd written an article talking about my own sufferings, depression and mental health and whatnot. And I'd written this article and it had said, there's going to be an epidemic in football unless we do something about it. There's already an epidemic of mental health on the streets, but there is going to be a problem because everything is bottled up. No one wants to talk about it. And it's only a matter of time before there's a high profile incident. Yeah. And I woke up the next morning and my phone had gone ballistic. And that was the morning that, sorry.
No, that's okay. Take your time.
But that morning, that was when Gary Speed had been found dead.
Take time. Take your time.
It was absolutely horrendous.
What we appreciate, Dave, is that you are telling that story, but it is really important that that story is told, isn't it? And that story, if that story isn't told, then people do bottle it up, like you're saying. It does become an epidemic. You yourself as a person has obviously dealt with that and carried it through. You've thankfully come out the other side and you've been strong enough to deal with it. But it is a problem, isn't it, in football now, that some people can't deal with those problems, can they? And they need support.
It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem still. I remember being at Portsmouth and I wasn't having a good time of it. I wasn't playing well. The fans were on my back. It was genuinely, there were times where it was scary. But I was so lucky. We had a club doctor who sat on the mental health board in it's regionalised, the mental health thing, and in the south he was the top, and he just looked at me one morning and he said, "You're not very well, are you?" I was like,
"Really?
How did you know that?" And I knew I was busted because you try and cover it up. This is the thing, men especially try and cover it up. And I thought, oh my God, I'm busted. So I thought I was covering over. And he got me on to the straight and narrow. And he was amazing, absolutely amazing. Greg Warner, Dr. Greg Warner was his name. Unbelievable. And I just remember thinking, if everybody could just get access to this, if everybody would just open up, oh my God, where we would be as forget football, where we would be as a society.
And what's your message to football or anybody else that's out there struggling now? What would you say to them?
It's hard because everybody wants this magic answer. The magic answer at the moment is you got to talk. If you know anything about mental health, anything whatsoever, that's the easiest thing not to do. It's the easiest thing not to do. I come at it from a different way, which is small nudges. Small nudges are really important. So small nudges are just every day, just checking in. How you doing? You all right? Do you want to go to coffee? Do you want to go for a beer? How's it going? Just those sort of small nudges. That's what people want. That's what they need. And you'd be surprised that the reaction you'll get just from a small nudge. Yeah. You can nudge somebody really gently and suddenly the dam breaks and everything comes out of them. And some people just want to, I had one this morning we sort of help each other and we're just having a chat, talked about rubbish for an hour over a cup of tea. It really helps. It really, really helps. So the onus is less on the person, I believe. I'm not clinician or medical expert, but I know enough now to say that it's much easier for the rest of us to check on each other rather than that person to suddenly put their hand up and say, do you know what, I'm not doing very well. That doesn't happen. And that's why suicide is at the levels it's at for men's under 50, the biggest killer of men under 50. That stat is phenomenal. How that can be in this day and age is just incredible, and it's for a variety of factors. So the best way of trying to combat it is we got to check on each other.
It's a great message, and I move you on now to the current day. You are the Maidenhead United ladies manager. And well, you laugh. I mean, how are you finding that? Well, it's a real gear change for you.
Yeah.
And we talked about the corporate stuff, and we'll touch on that again in a minute. But how is that for you? How are you enjoying it?
I love it. So actually, my job with Maidenhead is head of performance and coaching.
Yeah.
So there's getting on for about 100 teams in the club, and it's everything we're doing at the moment is geared towards, hopefully, fingers crossed, getting our new stadium. Now that's still a few years off, but we're starting now to plan for that. Where is it that we want to be when we turn the key and move into that stadium? What is it that we want to move in with? And that's where my studies in culture and creating a culture and psychology, that's where they've sort of come to the fore, really. So the women's team is sort of 10% of the role.
Yeah.
But I probably spend way more time with it.
You love it, don't you?
I love it. I honestly,
can tell the passion.
I absolutely love it because you sat down, you're trying to create something which is, okay, this is it. This is what we call it the Maidenhead way. This is what we're going to move in with. This is how it's all going to work. These are the teams that we're going to have. This is how they progress. This is the culture. That's what we do. That's a big job. That's a really, really big job. And managing the women's team, it satisfies my need to shout at people, probably not doing what I never used to do either on the pitch. But also to kind of test myself, and I have a ready-made squad of players where we can test this out, frankly, for want of a better, if we have ideas around team culture and bonding, we can test it out and we can see what works and what doesn't work. But they are brilliant. They are absolutely brilliant. They are every bit as committed. Don't ever let anyone tell you that women's football is not as committed as a men's game. We have some very ruthless players. They are extremely keen, the younger ones, to go on and have careers. The standard has completely taken me by surprise. The standard is... So we have a couple of teams who've got huge budgets, so we don't pay. So they've got huge budgets, and naturally, the natural order of things is they'll go through the league and they'll get promoted. Okay, that's fine. But everybody else is here, and so things like team culture and bonding make a massive, massive difference. And that's what we found this year. We have won games simply because we've been a tighter knit group on the day and throughout the week, and it's had an effect on match day. And so I see this in real time, and then it gets me excited about where's the crossover between corporate and sport, which is something obviously that I've always been interested in. What lessons can we apply, and what can I'm a sucker for any little bit of information. If it's something from the NFL or it's something that Coca-Cola are doing or whoever, or what, I'm not sure if we're allowed to say that, but
you can. Yeah.
Or anybody, and I will listen to anything and say I can pinch that, I can use that, and I can put it together with this, and then I can create something, and that's what I'm interested in.
And I know that's something that you're really passionate about now, and you are talking to corporate clients. And so how can our viewers and our listeners get in touch with you, Dave, to talk to you about coming into their organisation, for you to talk to them?
So I have a website, davekitson.me. You'll find me on LinkedIn as well. You can just drop us a message. I don't have teams and teams of people. It's me who will talk to me, that's 90% of my business is LinkedIn. For that sort of thing, it's the perfect tool to use, actually. But website will tell you everything about me, what I do, where I've been, that kind of thing. I'm more easily contactable than I was when I was writing the books.
Fair enough. Dave Kitson, it's been an absolute joy for the last hour to talk to you. Thank you so much,
Cheers,
Dave.
thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for your time.